There are a few habits that you need to quit if you don't want to be stuck as a jazz beginner forever. Some of them might be a bit hard to give up. In fact, I think one of them will probably offend a few of you guys.
I am furious with you!
But it's worth it to get this right, and as you watch this video, let me know which one you think is the most important, or if I forgot to mention one. Let's start with some practical music theory that helps you play better, because this is a very common mistake or habit that you can fix quite easily. I certainly remember doing this from when I was just starting out with jazz. It is completely pointless to translate chords and chord progressions into scale, so just stop doing that. Simply because that's not actually helping you play better. It just isn't useful information, and it will only help you sound like this. You need to change how you think about what notes to play. When you're improvising jazz, then you're using scales that have 7 or more notes, which means that you can add a lot of color, but it also means that you need to be able to choose the right notes and be aware of what you're playing, which is maybe different from what you're used to with the pentatonic scale, but in the end, you actually want it to be the same as the pentatonic scale. You don't want to think about the notes that you're playing while you're trying to play a solo. Let's say that you have a D minor 7 chord, and that's the 2 chord in C major. You want to have different levels or priorities for the notes in the scale. You want to be aware that the D minor 7 chord tones are stronger or closer to the chord, because having that overview makes it easier to play something that really nails the sound of the chord. But you want to actually go a step further than just having that overview of the notes. When you improvise, then you're not starting from scratch every time. So you want to have a vocabulary of flexible licks that you can use in your solo and put together in new creative ways. So for that D minor 7, you might know that you can use an F major 7 arpeggio, and that a certain chromatic phrase sounds great. And if you put these two together, you get this. The important thing here is that you have melodic building blocks that you can work with, that you're not thinking about rows of notes and theory while you're trying to play a solo. So practice your scales and arpeggios, but make sure to also learn vocabulary using them so that you have some melodies that go with it. Later, I'll show you how you can also change the way that you think about chords and chord progressions, because that can also be very inefficient. I guess Ed Sheeran and Daft Punk might disagree with me on this, but a 4-bar loop is not really a song, and if you want to learn jazz, then you also need to learn jazz songs. And jazz songs are almost never just 4-bar loops. Learning songs is going to get really difficult if you're only practicing looped 2-5-1 progression or a static major 7 chord. It's the kind of thing that's beneficial to do for a short period of time, but you probably never want to do it for more than a few days. You don't go to a jam session to play a 2-5-1 in E flat for 20 minutes. The rhythm section would hate you. You go there to play songs, so that's also what you need to learn. Now, of course, the first song can be very difficult to get through, but if you pick an easy one, then it's far from impossible. And you can check out my roadmap course if you want a step-by-step guide to take you through that process. So learning the song and also learning to solo on a jazz standard. I really have fun helping students in the course community with feedback as they solo with the material and build their skills. It's become a great place to hang out. If you're working on learning songs, then it can be difficult to remember all those chords in there. Most jazz standards are 32 bars, so that's probably more than 32 chords that you need to remember. The thing is that you should not be thinking about each chord. That's only making it much more difficult. Instead, you want to chunk the chords together, because if you know how to do that, then you don't need to remember as many things. It's like learning to read the words in a sentence instead of trying to memorize all the letters that are in it. For this, you want to learn to recognize these harmonic building blocks in the chord progressions. Keep it easy in the beginning, just start with the 2-5-1s and the turnarounds, but make sure to learn more, because that will make it 1,000 times easier to learn chord progressions by heart. And it also makes it easier to hear chord progressions, because hearing a D minor 7 out of context is not as easy as hearing a turnaround. The building blocks make it closer to something that you can hear. Relating it to a bass melody or how it sounds in other songs is really going to make it much more useful. Remember to let me know in the comments which habit is the most important for you and if I forgot to mention one. When I went from playing blues and rock to playing jazz, then one of the transitions that was quite difficult was getting used to improvising with 7-note scales like the major scale instead of the pentatonic scale. Now for me, it took some time before I figured out how to learn the scale and what to practice, especially when it comes to jazz. I started out with major scale exercises that might be useful for getting a bit more flexible with the scale in a technical sense, but they really didn't help me when it comes to playing jazz. But you don't need to do that. Instead of just running up and down the scale or playing 4-note sequences, then you're better off focusing on diatonic triads and arpeggios, and also how to add chromatic leading notes to that, because that is what the jazz licks are made of. The way I always tell students to build this is by starting with the diatonic thirds as a stepping stone, then go to the diatonic triads, and from there to the 7th chords, which are sort of the main structure in most jazz music. When you work on these exercises, then you're practicing things that you need when you're solo, and you make it easier to play lines like this. This is what is absolutely horrible about beginning jazz, and also what is one of the greatest things about jazz at the same time. There are so many possibilities and so many interesting and wonderful things to check out in jazz, but you also have to watch out that you don't get stuck just scratching the surface of a lot of stuff without really putting things to use. If you only practice exercises and you're exploring new material without also playing music and putting the things that you practice to use in songs, then you probably won't really learn what you're exploring. And you also won't get any better at playing jazz, which I believe was the goal to begin with. So don't get stuck with only doing exercises. This is again an essential part of how I've constructed the roadmap. Only a few exercises and then a practical way to turn them into music and help you get started playing solos. Maybe this one is not really a bad habit, it's more of a missing habit, but then it's also probably the easiest way to practice that you've ever heard of. If you're not listening to jazz, then you probably won't ever learn to play jazz. It's always a bit surprising that I have to say this at all, because why would you want to learn to play jazz if you don't listen to it? I was talking to Adam Levy, who you may or may not know. He has been a guest on the channel quite a few times, and he also has a great YouTube channel. He mentioned some practice advice that he had received from Joe DiOrio in a masterclass. Your practice sessions should always be 50% listening to music. Now, if Joe DiOrio recommends something, then that's something you should consider, given how incredible and influential a musician he was. But you could also argue that this means that if you're driving and listening to jazz, then you're also practicing. And you could be practicing while you're cooking or doing the dishes. So don't underestimate how much you learn just by listening to a few albums of great music. Okay, there's always one hot take in these videos. One of the most important parts of learning a song and being able to improvise over it is being able to hear the harmony inside and being able to really feel the time without leaning on the rest of the band and rely on them to carry you through the form. Now, the easiest way to get to that point is to practice with a minimal reference, or what we also might call a metronome. You want to practice so that if you mess up the time or the chords, then you immediately become aware of it. And of course, being aware of this and fixing it when you're practicing is a lot better than messing it up when you're playing with other people on stage. When I was studying, then one of my teachers pointed this out to me in a way that makes a lot of sense and that I never thought about before. He could tell that I was practicing with a backing track and told me to stop it, simply because it was too easy. When you're playing with a backing track, then you get all the harmony and you don't have to make any effort to feel the groove or keep the time. It's just too easy and you're not learning anything. When it comes to practicing to play music and learning songs, then you need to think about backing tracks as the chocolate cake of your practice routine. Something that you enjoy at the end, but which would make a terrible meal if it was the only thing that you were eating. I know this is not what most people want to hear, but that doesn't make it any less true. And you can always just leave some angry comments if that makes you feel better. An extra tip related to practicing scales and how to do this the right way. In the beginning, it's very difficult to take the exercises and then turn them into music, into these flexible building blocks that I mentioned in the beginning of the video. You need to add important ingredients like rhythm, phrasing, and melody. But how do you do that? Now, there is a way to build that skill, and you can get started with the method in this video, where I even throw in some nice chromatic tricks as well that will really make things flow and make you sound like your favorite jazz guitarist.